The wind howled through the trees on a bitterly cold February morning, carrying with it the scent of pine and wet earth. Daniel Foster, a 38-year-old single father, was jolted awake by an unfamiliar sound of something metallic, something softer and scraping coming from the shed behind his modest home. He sat up in bed, instinct kicking in before logic. His 10-year-old son, Jake, stirred slightly but didn't wake. Daniel had lived a quiet life since his wife died 4 years ago. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and devoted every other waking moment to raising Jake. Life was simple, a bit lonely, but manageable. But that morning, something was different. Still in his slippers, Daniel grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The fog clung low to the ground, and the early morning silence was broken only by the crunch of frost under his feet. He reached the shed, heart thudding in his chest. He gripped the handle, took a breath, and opened the door. What he saw took his breath away. Inside, hurled up on the dirt floor, were 6 children ranging from toddlers to teens huddled around a woman who looked unconscious. The children's clothes were soaked and torn, their cheeks pink with cold. The woman, slumped against the wall, had a gash on her temple and blood matted in her dark hair. The oldest girl, maybe 12 or 13, stepped in front of the others protectively. "Please," she whispered, "don't call anyone. She's our mom." Daniel stood frozen. The beam of the flashlight trembled in his hand. But his voice was steady when he said, "I'm not calling anyone. I'm bringing you inside." Within 15 minutes, Daniel had blankets wrapped around each child and the woman laid on his old brown sofa. He put a pot of water on the stove and called his friend Myra, a local nurse who lived a few blocks away. When Myra arrived, she examined the woman and cleaned her wound while Daniel listened to the children's story. Their mother's name was Elena. She had been widowed 2 years earlier when her husband died in a highway truck accident. With no extended family and 6 mouths to feed, she had worked cleaning jobs, often late into the night, and sometimes slept in shelters with her children. But when rent prices soared and she lost her latest job, they had been evicted. They had been living in her van until it was towed 2 days earlier. Last night, wandering through the neighborhood in the cold rain, Elena collapsed. Her kids, frightened and desperate, dragged her into the nearest unlocked structure, Daniel's shed. "I can't just let them go back out there," Daniel said quietly after Myra finished treating Elena. Myra hesitated. "You don't have the space or the money. A broken bar isn't your responsibility." Daniel looked at the kids wide-eyed, quiet, and trembling with hunger. He saw Jake watching from the hallway, holding his favorite comic book. Without saying a word, Jake walked over and handed it to one of the boys. Daniel smiled softly. "I think it is now." That night, he gave the kids the only 2 bedrooms in the house. He and Jake slept on the living room floor. Over the next week, Daniel juggled work, meals, laundry, and school enrollment forms. He cooked huge pots of pasta, taught the younger ones how to tie their shoes, and found himself up late folding tiny socks while Jake did homework beside him. The small, quiet home transformed into something messy and chaotic but alive. Word spread fast through the town. At first, there were whispers. "Did you hear about Daniel Foster? Took in a whole family. He's got 7 kids in that tiny house." People came to see for themselves. A neighbor brought over bags of groceries. Someone else dropped off a used crib. A local teacher donated books and school supplies. One morning, Daniel found 3 large boxes of clothes left on his porch with a note that read, "For the angels in your home." Then the mayor heard the story. A local news crew showed up a few days later. Daniel was hesitant but allowed the interview, only if Elena and the kids were comfortable. The news clip aired that night. People all over the town and later the state out were moved by the kindness of a man who had every reason to turn them away, but didn't. An online fundraiser launched by a high school student surpassed $50,000 in a week. The money allowed Daniel to renovate his home, add 2 extra bedrooms, and finally fix the roof that had been leaking for years. A local restaurant offered Elena a job, and volunteers helped care for the younger children while she trained. Slowly but surely, their lives began to change. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the house. It was in the people around them. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other began working together, donating, building, showing up with meals and furniture. An old widow down the street began tutoring the kids after school. A retired carpenter fixed porches and fences for struggling families. The Tona, once sleepy and closed off, came alive with compassion. 3 months after that cold morning in the shed, the town organized a community dinner in the local park to honor Daniel, Elena, and the children. Elena stood before the crowd with a microphone in hand. She had tears in her eyes, but her voice was strong. "I came to this town with nothing," she said, "not because I wanted to or but because I had no choice. My children and I were cold, hungry, and scared. But one man opened his door. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look the other way. He simply saw us." She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "You didn't just give us shelter, you gave us a second chance, and this Tona, you gave us a home." The crowd stood, applauding, cheering, crying. Daniel, ever humble, waved it off. "I just did what any dad would do." But everyone knew that wasn't true. What he did, most people wouldn't. Most people didn't. Later that night, sitting on a porch with a cup of tea, Daniel looked out at the yard where kids were playing. Elena sat beside him, her youngest asleep in her arms. Jake leaned against his dad's shoulder. "It's strange," she said softly, "how your shed became the place where our new life began." Daniel nodded. "It's even stranger how kindness can be so quiet at first, a broken bar but loud enough to shake a whole town."